we found no benefits above the requirements for protein synthesis, so above like 0.8 gram per pound.
On satiety.
For satiety, hunger, ad libitum energy intake, like all measures, whey shakes are not satiating at all. A lot of people actually get hungry from a whey shake. If you're like fasted, you're like, oh no, I'm not that hungry. Have a whey shake. A lot of people actually get triggers more appetite. It doesn't have like a compensatory response where afterwards you're full and you don't eat anymore.
Folks, Dr. Mike here for the RP Strength YouTube channel. And today we have in the studio with us an esteemed colleague, friend, and person who I wish I looked more like every single day that I have to stare in the mirror at this disgusting, ridiculous, mangled face. Menno Henselmans.
Glad to be here.
Do you just say that on every podcast, or are you really glad to be here?
I say it on every podcast, but in this case, it's true.
Oh my God. Menno, it's good to have you. Let's get cracking right into the meat and potatoes. You earlier made a social media post where you said, if I ever see Milo Wolf around any amount of protein, we're going to be fist fighting each other. Mm-hmm. And I want you to explain that.
I think I said fisting, not fist fighting.
Wow, that really does change things. But nonetheless, still violent, still very personal, and still controversial about how much protein that you two recommend. So just to put this in perspective, we had Milo on the channel a while ago. He said some emerging data suggests that for some folks, it might be a good idea to eat something like 1.25 grams of protein per pound of body weight, and maybe even a little bit more in some cases. You're typically of the perspective that for many cases, if not most, even as little as 0.75 grams per pound per day of protein can cover almost all, if not all of your bases. And I'm like the coward that I am at a gram per pound right in the middle. And it's like I have mom and dad, in this case, two dads, and you're in that sort of fight where you're at first yelling and then like you start throwing pillows, but I'm just waiting for like, you know, the dishes to start flying. Explain this to me in a way that with my limited intellect, I can understand. Where do you think Milo is coming from? Where are you coming from? And let's put some daylight between the two. Mm-hmm. Hit me.
From what I understand about Milo's perspective is that he relies primarily on the Japanese meta-analysis from 2020, I believe. And that one found, well, technically all it found is that there are benefits above 1.3 gram per kilogram per day. And they found that there wasn't really a cutoff point, it seemed, in the data. But the analysis also didn't do an actual breakpoint analysis. So they didn't actually check like what's the maximum point at which we find benefits for muscle growth or lean body mass. Lean body mass is what most of these meta-analysis should look at. So that's also good to realize. It's not necessarily even muscle growth. And these data have many, many, many problems with them. So for one, just the technical point that they technically didn't look at whether there are benefits above, usually what I recommend is 0.8 gram per pound or 1.8 gram per kilogram per day. They didn't actually look at if there are benefits above that. They just found that the model said there is a positive association, essentially, between higher intakes above 1.3 gram per kilogram per day. And it seemed that they went all the way up to what I think Milo said was 1.3 gram per pound.
Something like that.
When not adjusting for body weight gained, both lifters and non-lifters saw more hypertrophy as they consumed more protein, all the way to 1.3 grams per pound. However, in non-lifters, once you then controlled for body weight gained, that relationship kind of went away. Like past, like I think 0.7 grams per pound. Makes sense. Then you no longer gaining weight, it doesn't really matter, right? However, in lifters, even when adjusting for body weight gained, higher protein intakes led to more growth, all the way to 1.3 grams per pound. There was still an element of diminishing returns, wherein the slope was kind of greater up until around that previous figure of 1.6 grams per kilogram or 0.8 roughly. And then afterwards, the slope diminished, but it was still positive.
You could make that argument based on that data, based on those data. I think it's not entirely unreasonable. But looking at those data alone and not looking at the other data, especially with the many flaws of that meta-analysis, to me doesn't make a lot of sense. We can go into like Greg Knuckles' point as well later if you want. I think that's a bit more compelling. But you want to just list some of the major limitations with the meta-analysis?
Yes, and I want you to list them in a way that attacks Milo's character personally.
Right.
But seriously, let's get the flaw scientifically.
Yeah. So for one, they didn't really look at a breakpoint. That's a big one. And that's particularly problematic because they didn't report anything. It was honestly just a bad analysis. They didn't report model fit statistics, R squared, model fit. They just showed the line. They didn't even show the effect sizes, the data points. Like normally you show what the actual data points are, and then you show what the line that your model works through those data points, right? And they didn't even show the data points. They just show the model fit line, which doesn't tell you much at all. And it's kind of like, just trust me, bro. Now, going into the actual limitations of the data they got in the first place is that they included weight loss studies. And quite a lot of them were weight loss studies. In fact, I think they said at some point in the paper, 5 out of 104, something like 5 out of 105 papers were actually completely equal in conditions. All the other papers had at least one confounding factor. So very often, the higher protein intake group had a higher energy intake group because the control group just didn't supplement protein. So they looked at protein supplementation versus placebo, basically nothing.
Let me describe that to the folks listening, what you're trying to say. If you try to see which amount of protein will get me more jacked or get me less muscle loss, but your study design is one group eats X and another group eats X plus supplementary protein, you're now comparing two conditions, not just protein differences, but protein and calorie differences. And so we have to ask the question as scientists is, are they getting more jacked because they're eating more protein, or is it the calories? Because then you would need a third group potentially that had extra protein, for the first group regular, second group extra protein, third group extra carbs to equalize the calories. And then you could really test, is it the calories or is it the protein? And so that wasn't done in many of the studies, or I assume almost all of them. And then thus it's very difficult to see, like, is it really the extra protein doing the work?
Yes. Another big factor was nutrient timing. Now, a lot of people will say nutrient timing doesn't matter, but there are actually a couple studies where they supplement additional protein. So most of these studies, all of them actually, they look at habitual protein intake in one group, habitual protein intake in the other group, and then one of the groups supplements additional protein on top of that, like a protein supplement, whey protein or whatever. Usually, they supplement that pre or post-workout or as an additional meal. So you're increasing meal frequency or you have post-workout supplementation. A lot of people in evidence-based fitness will say that doesn't matter. And largely, I agree with that. Like at least total daily protein intake is more important than when you consume it. But it's more of a spectrum to me than simply saying it doesn't matter. And there are actually at least 3 studies where the additional protein intake group ended up not having a higher total protein intake, but they did have the benefit of the nutrient timing, like post-workout protein supplementation, and they still got better gains. And that can happen because of these habitual intakes. Like you just get a bunch of people, you tell half of them, add some protein shake to your daily intake. And then it turns out, just because of life or whatever, their normal protein intake decreased. And therefore, or the other group had an increase in protein intake because it's not controlled in these studies. It's just habitual intake. And then it can happen that you do the study, and as researchers, you're often very sad to find out, I've also had it happen, at the end, the group that we wanted to consume more protein didn't actually consume more protein, which kind of invalidates your whole study. But in some of these studies, you find that still they got better gains.
So that's a pretty robust way by accident to measure the fact that nutrient timing, at least seen in one of 2 ways, one peri-workout nutrition or to an additional meal. Maybe you eat 2 or 3 times a day. Now you eat 3 or 4 times a day. And so we're unable to tell if it's like, is it the extra calories? Is it the extra meal frequency? Or is it the attention to the peri-workout window that is really doing the heavy lifting to actually make folks have better gains or less impactful muscle losses on a fat loss phase?
Yeah. And if you look at the studies that have controlled for these things, especially nutrient timing, interestingly, energy intake doesn't scream out to me like a huge confounding variable. If you look at the studies where nutrient timing was controlled, so they just increased protein intake, not like habitual intake plus protein shake. Usually they actually just told them aim for this versus aim for this. In those studies, and there are about 45 of them, there is not a single study that has found benefits over the 1.6 gram per kilogram per day.
Okay. So let's open that up super, super quick. That's a big problem. because one of the accurate critiques of the meta-analytic approach of meta-analyses as a class of research exploration is that sometimes through interesting processes of kind of statistical aggregation, you can get a look from a meta-analysis that no one study actually found. And it wasn't even that, oh, well, this is like a situation where if you look at one word at a time, nothing makes sense. But if you look at a whole sentence, it makes sense. It's not one of those. It's actually just statistical anomaly that occurs. And then you end up being like, oh, there's something there. But when there's a very well-designed 10 studies inside of a subset of 100 that are meta-analyzed, and those 10 studies exactly ask the very rigorous question you're asking, and all of them say it doesn't work, it's really difficult to figure out like how that situation could actually play out. And so maybe there is something emerging from the statistical noise that is true, but we have to be guarded with the idea that like, well, actually, man, maybe there's not. You know what I mean? It's sort of similar to kind of saying, you know, there are people that take multivitamins and don't. And let's say the multivitamin people have like a penis size that's like 8 inches larger, right? But then you actually give people a multivitamin and measure their penis size for 8 weeks and just nothing happens to it. That you got to be like, man, like, so we tested the exact thing we were asking and that didn't work. Are we really comfortable in concluding from meta-analytic, which is kind of a rough proxy, that this thing really works? Like, that's a problem. Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. Especially because since our original meta-analysis, which also absolutely wasn't perfect, but it confirmed simply exactly what I expected from the fact of that we had at least 45 studies showing, okay, none of these studies actually find a benefit over 1.6 gram per kilogram per day. And then we did a breakpoint analysis, which found exactly 1.6 gram per kilogram per day as the most likely breakpoint. So the point at which additional protein intake no longer further increased lean body mass gains. Then I was like, oh, okay, that's exactly as expected. So a lot of people have looked at like our meta-analysis versus the newer meta-analysis. I think both.
What do you mean our meta-analysis?
So I was part of a meta-analysis.
Oh, so it's fucking biased.
Yes. It's just me defending my original biases and Milo coming out and me not wanting to believe.
When the researchers were doing the test tube stuff, do you walk into the lab and hand them $1 bill and you're like, more in this test tube? Shh.
Yeah.
That's how science works.
For the meta, we don't have to do that. We just change the numbers in the spreadsheet.
Even easier.
Yes.
Do you give yourself $1 then?
So if it's like 1.6, it's like maybe 2.2, and I'm just like 1.6.
Science.
That's it. That's all there is.
All right, folks, that's been fun. All right. Yes. Okay. Heard loud and clear.
No, I can play devil's advocate for my own views.
Of course. Please.
For one, the 1.6, I recommend 1.8, right? To be clear. I think 1.6 is pretty much where the data show at this point, we no longer see significant benefits. But to your point of...
This is grams per kilogram.
Yes, grams per kilogram.
So for people in the civilized world that use pounds and have American Eagles as pets at home, that's 0.8 grams per pound per day. 0.7.
0.7 is where we no longer see significant benefits in randomized controlled trials that controlled for nutrient timing.
The very exact kind of studies you want to do to see if eating more protein will actually get you more jacked.
Yeah. But you could argue, you can make a very reasonable argument, Greg Nuckols has made that argument in part, that even though none of these individual studies find a benefit, some of the studies which didn't have nutrient timing, they did find a benefit. Plus, if we aggregate all of these studies together, we do see some trends that the effect sizes tend to be greater in the higher protein groups, even though individually in none of the studies that's statistically significant.
Okay.
They have pretty small sample sizes. You know, trained lifters, 8-week study, how much muscle growth are you going to get? Okay, they get maybe a little bit more gains in one of the groups. It's hard to detect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of variance there.
So it's like if you have a ruler that measures only in integer inches, but something increased by 2 centimeters, which is 2.54 centimeters is 1 inch, you would actually conclude from that study that like nothing happened, but like 2 centimeters is damn near almost an inch. And so you would be finding a result. Your study is not powered enough to detect the difference.
Exactly.
And we already know the difference is quite small from eating plenty of protein to eating extra plenty. But like if you're eating it for years and you're training really hard, it is worth to get an extra 5 or 10% gains, which is kind of a big deal, especially if you're advanced. That's kind of how the understanding goes. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I probably want to do a new meta-analysis based on, especially Greg Nuckols' critique. Milo Wolf's study not so much. The meta that he...
Is there something you don't like about Japanese people that you want to tell us about on this channel?
I like the researchers. I like the fact in particular that they essentially admitted that their methods were not so good. And they did another meta-analysis afterwards on strength development. And they switched essentially to our method, which excluded weight loss studies. And then they found that for strength development, maximum gains occur at 1.5 gram per kilogram per day. So even a little bit lower, technically speaking, than the 1.6 we found.
But we do know strength training probably on mechanistic grounds does not require as much protein to have the whole process go to maximum.
Yes, but at least theoretically, if there was substantial additional muscle growth, that should translate into greater strength development.
In the long term.
Yeah, again, in short term, you might not see that effect. So again, there is some room for debate there, but it's pretty striking that the number is almost exactly the same, like 1.5, 1.6.
Yeah.
So, and again, none of the individual studies find statistically significantly greater muscle growth or strength development or muscle growth when we control for nutrient timing. And even when you don't control for nutrient timing, there are again like 45 studies, and there are 3 or 4 that find benefits of higher intakes. Now, one additional major limitation of all these habitual intake studies is basically what people think happens is, so protein intake 1.6, other group consumes 2.2. This group has more gains, therefore 2.2 is better. That is not the case in one of these studies with habitual intakes, which all the meta-analyses look at. I don't know why that is. I addressed it when we did the meta-analysis as well. It's easier to study, I guess. But what we're interested in is, look, you target 1.6, I target 2.2, and then we see who gets better results, right? And then with a whole group of people, not just one individual. If I look at group of people consuming 1.6 habitually, like their normal intake, that means 1.6 is the average. Mm-hmm. That's usually normally distributed, which means half the people in that study are consuming less than 1.6 gram per kilogram per day. Mm-hmm. So if there are benefits of the 2.2, it could very well be the case that all of those benefits are from the 50% of people that weren't even consuming the average intake to begin with.
That makes sense. So in essence, what you're saying is it could be that 2.2 is better on the average, but mostly that's because when you compare to 1.6, a ton of those people that are eating like 1 in the 1.6 average are dragging down the curve. And if you just eliminate the really nasty low intakes, which most of the 2.2 people have, that's where you get most of the benefits. It's kind of like if you take runners of very different running speeds and you put like a rabid bear behind them that runs at like 10 meters per second. It's not that you need to run much faster than that. It's that if you run any slower, you get eaten. And so much, much less than 1.6 could be the real problem bringing the 1.6 down. Potentially.
Yes, especially in these habitual intake studies.
Yeah.
Because you're not looking at 1.6 versus 2.2. You're looking at a distribution of people with average 1.6 versus average 2.2.
Correct. There's also multiple confounding factors of people who take in 2.2 typically are demographically more interested in optimizing hypertrophy and maybe sleeping better, training better, more attention to detail. They've seen better gains and thus have jumped on the wagon of gaining more protein because they have better genetics. Because you have shit gains either way, you're kind of like, fuck this. Dope. Can you tell us a little bit more about Greg Nuckols' recent articles? Excellent article, Stronger by Science. Everyone should go read it if you have 50 hours. If not, just read the first several paragraphs where Greg is kind enough to summarize the article's findings in an awesome table. I mean, Stronger by Science is just an amazing resource. Go check it out. And so what did Greg do that's slightly different than Milo? Well, actually, just what's the summary that you can give of Greg's insight? And what do you think about it personally? Is Greg still one of these just totally stupid people that just can't reason about protein, although he's real smart, but about protein, just dumb as rocks?
Yeah, so Milo's argument rested pretty much entirely on finding out that there was another Japanese meta-analysis that seemingly found benefits of higher intakes.
Which is good, right? It's good that he surfaced that because people were just, to his point, citing only exclusively the older meta and just never even recognized the new one exists, which maybe for good reason, but maybe like we should be aware of it.
Yes. Then I would say, he didn't recognize the fact that the same researchers using better methods found, at least for strength development, that the earlier results of ours were very neatly replicated.
Sure.
And then what Greg Nuckols did, funny enough, is he looked at yet another meta-analysis that nobody looked at, Nunes et al. In 2022, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, where are they from, Nunes et al.?
I think it was a mixed group. I think the lead author is Brazilian, if I'm not mistaken.
How much do we really trust the Brazilians as a people?
I mean, that's actually honestly not an entirely unfair point when it comes to exercise science studies, because there have been multiple instances, especially by the Mateus Barbalho and Paulo Gentil, where those research groups have been implicated in I think actually Greg Knuckles
Yes,
also
correct.
said that.
Yeah.
What is it? Statistically improbable data patterns.
I call it statistical malfeasance.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've lived in Brazil. Brazil is great. They're very dedicated, very into fitness. A lot of good researchers
Yes, they
there.
love fitness. Yeah.
And in this case, a meta-analysis is not like one of those studies, and none of these researchers were implicated in any type of
I'm
data
kidding.
fraud or whatever.
The whole thing's out fucking
Yeah.
people. I'm just trying to stir the fucking pot for no reason.
So let's assume that all the data were well done. It was
And
a
we
great
have every reason to
meta-analysis.
believe that it was all well done.
Yeah, actually, one of the authors on the new meta-analysis, Nunes et al., was also on our meta-analysis, Stuart Phillips.
Oh, dope.
He's also great.
Yeah, Stu Phillips, if he ever ceases to exist, I believe all protein will also cease to exist because he is connected to the protein force in such a
protein
deep
guy.
way. Yeah.
So there was a much better analysis, but they didn't really perform a breakpoint analysis. They looked at kind of categories, and they found that the people that ended up with higher protein intakes than 1.6 get better gains than the people that ended up with protein intakes in the range of 1.3 to 1.6.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you don't know if it's the benefits going up to 1.6 that make the difference, or if there are benefits to higher intakes.
Mm-hmm.
So Greg Knuckles took the data from that meta-analysis, reanalyzed it in a much better manner. Really good, very compelling meta-analysis. I would argue, I would even dare say it's the first time I've seen evidence that made me question like, oh shit, maybe actually there are really benefits of more than 1.8 gram per kilogram, more than 0.8 gram per pound. And I actually have no critiques at all on the way he did the analysis. The only issue is that he took the data from the Nunes et al. Meta-analysis, which again is data where pretty much all the protein studies are lumped together. No control for energy intake, no control for nutrient timing. And again, looking only at these studies where they had habitual intake versus habitual intake plus protein intake. And the data on those studies are a lot more positive than the data that are controlled, as I said, for nutrient timing. And they looked at groups where it's you target this, you target this.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I'm actually not entirely sure. I'm working on like an updated meta-analysis where we specifically look at the controlled studies with 1.6 or higher intakes and then see if there is some benefit that we can, in a meta-analysis, tease out, showing that there are some benefits to higher intakes.
Mm-hmm.
Greg Knuckles said, based on his data analysis, the breakpoint is more likely to be 2 grams per kilogram.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be somewhere in the range of, I think, 1.7 to 2.3 or 2.4 even, which is also quite a wide range. But he said the most likely breakpoint is 2 grams per kilogram. Now,
breakpoint meaning eating any more than this almost certainly does not cause
Yes.
any better gains. Right?
yes. And again, statistically, that holds up entirely. The only question is that because in these studies they have better nutrient timing, higher energy intakes, or if it's really the protein intake?
There's actually an interesting, it's not a formal sub-analysis, but it's a qualitative examination of data that you can do that I'm a real big fan of. When you have lots of studies examining a certain subject, what you can do is not even formal subgroup analysis. What you can do is take all the studies and at least heuristically rank them on the qualitative strength of their methods.
Mm-hmm.
Like which one of these are the best controlled, most rigorous, have the best internal validity at least, and hopefully external.
Yeah.
And then when you get a ranking like that, then you actually rank out next to them their roughly the effect sizes of their findings. And you try to ask the question of like, as the studies get better and better controlled in the sample of, let's say, 50 studies, where is the trend for the results? Because oftentimes there is no trend. And then you're like, okay, cool. So like, we're actually, whatever the meta-analysis says is probably the directionality of the data. It's really, really unfortunate if you find that the data gets, less convincing, the better control is, that you're dealing with very poor data quality, analytic quality. And that's when you say like, this meta-analysis is something we just should probably not be looking at. But sometimes and very often what ends up happening is when you have ranked studies by how good the studies are, you have either a dissipation of the trend or an improvement in the trend. If it's dissipation, it really is like, dude, you guys, this is probably statistical noise. There's very unlikely to be anything here.
Yes.
If it's improvement of the trend, it's like, well, the better the study, the more we find that there's something there. There's probably something there. Like if you think you see a needle in a haystack and the closer you look, you're like, there's a needle, versus the closer you look and you're like, I don't see the needle anymore. But when I back up, I definitely think I see a needle. There ain't no needle there. You're just losing your mind.
Exactly.
That happens in a bunch of different sciences. And so in this case, if we did one of those, you're pretty confident that we would find that the higher formal controls we add to the study, the less likely it's discovered that higher protein is better.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to the possibility of higher intakes having like a marginal benefit.
Mhm.
But I would say that we should have found that more consistently in individual studies at least.
Yeah.
And we also have a lot of studies now on vegan diets, finding surprisingly small effects, like much smaller effects than we anticipated, say 10 years ago, which also suggests that like, even the 1.6 or the 1.8, which I recommend, is often already enough with vegetarian or vegan diets, which again also suggests it's already pretty safe. Because if that was just like kind of on a threshold and you significantly reduce the protein quality, which happens in the vegan diet, you would expect significantly worse gains.
Yeah, that's a very good way to go about it. Menno, what is your kind of summary take, your current position on protein recommendation, recognizing Milo's insights, your own insights, and Greg Nuckols' recent summary? Where do you tend to give, like, I would like two things from you. How much protein do I need to eat if I just want to get awesome gains, not have to worry and not have to turn my life into a giant protein feeding session? And two, if I'm like, just have no friends, no one cares about me at all I have is the gym, every gram of gains counts to me. How much protein should I be eating to know with good margin that there's no new meta that's going to come out and say, look, you kind of pissed away marginally the last year and a half of your training?
I would say that for almost all populations, the 1.8 gram per kilogram, 0.8 gram per pound is going to be sufficient.
So if I weigh 200 pounds, I eat 160 grams of protein or more. And like
that's your minimum daily intake.
Minimum.
And at least 50% of that has to come from high quality sources.
Okay.
And you have to distribute it across at least 3 meals with some reasonable nutrient timing. The workout has to be, you're not training fasted, at least within a few hours after the workout, or let's say within a 5-hour intermeal window. You need the pre and the post workout meals.
Okay. So that's the bottom end.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you consume...
That's not the target.
No, that's a minimum target.
Minimum target.
Yes. So most people end up with higher intakes anyway.
Yes.
Which already buffers in some... there's an automatic buffer essentially when you formulate it that way.
Yeah. But you don't want to get into telling your like RP Diet Coach app, like I'm 200 pounds, I'm going to eat 160. You're going to want 160 to be like, better eat that every time. And it had better be high quality and you had better get your timing right.
Yeah.
So what's a comfortable buffer that you're going to tell people that like, look, okay, yes, it's 160 for 200 pound people. If I eat 180, and I get my nutrient time is okay, and I zig when I should have zagged a couple of times, is that going to save me, or do you need to go to 200?
I would say if every gram counts, you don't want to wait until there's another meta-analysis looking at the effect of study quality on these meta-analyses, like an arbiter. Then I would go with the Greg Nuckols 2 gram per kilogram. So
which is almost a gram per pound.
Yeah. And you could go with a gram per pound if you're like even more like, look, I don't even want a chance that maybe some new study comes out as well. And then there's a new meta-analysis and turns out, yeah, actually there was like a 5% increase in gains. It's possible. So the thing with the range is that we're not just looking at the effect of, okay, the optimal intake is likely here. Most of the variance between these numbers comes from the uncertainty that we have from the data. Like the data are limited.
Yes.
Right. So it's not like Greg and I come to a different number and it's either this or it's that number. It's like we both come to a range essentially. And Greg says, I think we should be here. And I say, I think this is most likely enough when you account for all of these confounding factors. But if you're like, hey, I don't care about any of that. I just want to make absolutely sure. I don't care about the data or for what reason. If I absolutely want to maximize muscle growth, I would probably go with the breakpoint from Greg's current analysis, which is 2 gram per kilogram. 2
gram per kilogram, roughly a gram per pound. And to be extra safe. And then so eating more than a gram per pound, can you see a situation where drug-free bodybuilders in the last several weeks of contest prep on a very low calorie diet could benefit from more protein than that still? Or is that to you like really possible, but stretching expectations?
Very much stretching it, I would say. The whole idea of higher energy intakes being necessary in energy deficit is really not well supported.
Higher protein intakes necessary in a low energy deficit.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's direct research, and at least in untrained individuals, showing it's not the case.
Yeah.
In trained individuals, we don't have a good study that essentially does a triple interaction effect, right? So we're not just looking at, is there a higher protein intake in training versus non-training individuals? But then also, does that interact with the effect of energy intake as well? So it's like if you're training and you're in energy deficit, then there's a further increase. That's very difficult to find in studies.
Yeah.
And current data simply don't support it yet. It's not an unreasonable hypothesis, but it also doesn't really mechanistically follow. Like a lot of people have some intuitive idea of like, oh yeah, it makes sense because it prevents muscle loss, or like then your body doesn't have to oxidize protein. Protein oxidation and breakdown, they don't actually normally increase much in energy deficit. And if you're like woefully deficient, it can. But normally what happens is your body just tunes down the protein synthesis.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, okay, so there's less protein synthesis, protein breakdown levels are the same, then theoretically, you could actually need less protein.
Yeah, sure. We're not going to pull too much on that thread.
Yeah.
We're going to get canceled for that one. That is very insightful. So basically, you would say sort of like 0.8 grams per pound if you're doing a pretty good job and you need to be sure you're doing fine. And then roughly a gram per pound if you really just do not want to be on the wrong side of this freight train of protein controversy.
There are a few categories which likely need the higher end of that, maybe even more.
Okay.
Yeah, vegans, people on gear. I think actually, funny enough, I'm known as the low protein guy, but for people on gear, I actually recommend very high.
I don't like the term people on gear, and I'll tell you why.
Persons of gear.
We used to call them homeless people, but now the politically correct term is people experiencing homelessness. I don't like that because it irritates my right-wing supremacy vibe. And so I actually do not like to call them people on gear. I like to call them hopeless, degenerate steroid addicts, and I never abbreviate.
Right. Okay. So a hopeless, degenerate steroid addict
Thank you.
probably needs a little bit more protein. In fact, not a little bit, a lot more.
But that's a personal hypothesis you have, which has almost no support in the data.
We have data on protein synthesis in people on gear.
Okay.
And it goes up massively.
So it's data that's inferenced, not for real world data, but inferential data based on physiological understanding of cellular processes.
Plus, in the absence of data on how much protein intake is required to maximize muscle growth, in this case, shocker from the evidence-based guy, I actually think it makes sense to look at the protein intakes of professional bodybuilders.
Sure, of course. Next best thing.
Yes.
Right. You look at physiological rationale, you look at real world practices. And since we don't have any direct data, you're not going to be like, well, both of these are wrong and stupid. You're going to be like, just do the safe thing and eat more protein.
Yes.
And so like for steroid people, maybe 1.25 grams per pound or something like that is one of those insurance policy numbers.
I think some of the survey data on like high level professional bodybuilders, they're in the range of 2.3 to like 3.1 gram per kilogram. So that's actually kind of like more like Milo's recommendations.
Yes.
I think that makes sense.
Are you saying Milo's on steroids? Scott, that's the clip. Very cool. Very cool thumbnail. Menno, that was very insightful. So speaking of protein, I consume protein for specifically 3 reasons. More protein. Just more. Whatever amount you think, more. For 3 reasons. Reason 1 is that protein like mechanistically makes you jacked because it composes your muscles. Reason 2 is that I want people to see me consume a lot of protein, so they ask me if I'm into fitness so that I can just ramble about my macros to them until they
shows you're rich, right?
Awkwardly leave. Also, yes, because my value of wealth peaked in the 1920s, I absolutely eat way higher protein just to tell people like I can do this, and all of you have to like make mock ham sandwiches and shit like that.
You care about inflation?
Inflation must be something my servants are worried about. Yes. The only thing inflating is my money supply. Yes. But most importantly, the reason I eat a lot of protein is because I often become hungry and want to eat snacks and treats. But protein crushes my appetite when I eat way more of it. Is anything about what I said wrong in your view?
I think protein is not inherently more satiating than carbs or fats when you exceed the requirements for muscle protein synthesis.
So if I'm getting a gram per pound, eating 1.5 grams per pound of protein per day on a fat loss diet where I'm cutting my calories and taking that extra 0.5 gram per pound and cutting it out of my carbs and putting it into my protein, I thought was best practice. But you're here embarrassing me on my own, I will say, quite successful YouTube channel. How dare you? Explain.
Yeah. We actually did a study on exactly this to test this.
What do you mean you and the computer mouse that has jizz stains on it?
Yeah, that too. She participated. She.
Heavily.
Yeah. And we compared, I believe it was 1.8 versus 2.9. So that's like a lot more protein.
Oh,
Or 2.7, like 50%
per
increase.
kilogram per
Grams
day.
per kilogram. All civilized people use that.
Yes. Rule Britannia.
Yeah. It's funny because in science, everybody uses the metric system, but most of my audience also uses imperial system.
Yeah.
So it can get confusing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we found no benefits above the requirement for protein synthesis. So above like 0.8 gram per pound.
On satiety.
For satiety, hunger, ad libitum energy intake, like all measures.
So ad libitum energy intake means if we feed you some protein, but then we say like eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
People who get way more protein don't really eat any less food than you would expect.
Yeah, you give them a buffet and you're like, dig in, bro.
Hell yeah. Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
Like you see those study manuscript, like an asterisk, one person died of overeating. You're like, holy shit, they really did push it. Okay, but like there has to be something to how this got started. Can you steel man the idea? Is it a food palatability thing? Is it like the way protein hits the face? Because I know a lot of the protein studies, the real smart researchers, what they do is they go, okay, there may be something filling about chewing on a protein-like texture. And so if we give people like clear whey protein shakes and they still experience a decrease in hunger, well, there's something mechanistically with protein maybe. But if we give them clear whey protein shakes and they're like, I'm just as hungry as I ever was, we're like, well, it must not be the protein then. It might be something about the food. Are there any studies that have looked at that specifically?
Yes. And that's precisely the point, that protein per se is not inherently more satiating than carbs or fats. Research is quite clear on this. There's also a meta-analysis that looked at the effect, and you see that at lower intakes, there is an effect. Protein is inherently more satiating than carbs or fats.
When you're not getting enough.
Exactly.
And it's very well demonstrated. Protein hunger is actually demonstrated in medical research across third world countries. Like if you don't get enough protein, you actually start to dream and fantasize about meat. At the very low ends, by the way, politically incorrect, please, not politically incorrect, it's just messed up. So if you're a child or if you're watching this with a child, mute the next several seconds. At very low protein intakes for populations, you will get auto-development of cannibalism in many cases.
That's like the least politically incorrect thing you've said in a while.
That's true. Cannibalism is least. Wow, I have hit a new low point in my life. That was a direct quote from my psychotherapist.
Cannibalism is like a 3 out of 10 on the Mike scale.
Oh my God, it doesn't even make the Mike scale. Although if you think about it a lot, quite disturbing. Okay, so we already know that if you're not getting enough protein, more protein is more satiating and also necessary for all the protein stuff that it does.
It's called protein leverage.
I love it. So let's put that aside, because like if you're under eating protein, you're just like, can you just like stop?
You're not one of us.
Just like do better. Oh, nice. You're not one of us. Yeah, just turn off the channel. I'm just kidding. Don't. We get ad revenue.
You already outgrew.
You don't belong. You try to eat more protein. Like, nah, it's too late. If you're eating enough protein, like even a gram per pound per day. So you're saying like just on protein alone, if I eat more, I'm not going to get more satiated than if I eat more fats or more carbs. But are there any foods or food types of carbs or of fats, or is it the fats and carbs themselves that have a bigger yield on satiety? What's your take?
Yes. So at that point, it's no longer about the macronutrient. It's about the food.
Okay, pause. So that means if I eat more protein or more fats or more carbs, they have roughly the same effect on satiety as macronutrients.
Yes.
Okay, but the specific types of proteins or fats or carbs that I can eat that'll reduce my hunger more.
They matter greatly.
So liquid ones that are, I'm kidding. Liquids are known to cause a smaller decrease of satiety, correct?
Exactly.
And tell us the rest of the scale. What kinds of foods come out on this like anti-satiety thing?
So
pro-satiety, sorry, Jesus Christ.
Regardless of whether it's protein or not, something that you have to chew on a lot with a harder texture that requires more oral processing, as researchers say.
My God.
Oh, I expected something. No.
What did you do? Something sexual? Man,
Yes.
do you know how many sexual things I had queued up in my brain to say that I'm desperately trying to shut up about on this channel?
Disappointing.
Don't encourage me.
Yeah. So if
I've done a bit of oral processing myself, if you know what I mean. All right, fine.
So things that you have to chew on more and the like, they satiate more. If it's not so palatable, it also satiates more.
Yes. Okay. So food that is hyper delicious, you go through it, you just want more.
Exactly.
And then food that's not so tasty and you have to chew it on for a while, like broccoli, you're like, and someone's like, do you want more food? You're like, to be honest, I'm just over food altogether.
Yeah. Fiber is generally very satiating. Depends on the type
as
of
a
fiber.
nutrient or as a fiber that is present in highly voluminous foods like broccoli or melons or watermelon? Both.
Yes.
Independently, fiber has a satiating effect.
Yes.
Even
It's
if you
very
drink like a
potent.
Metamucil shake or something like that.
Yes. So supplements don't have the same benefits, but they still have benefits.
So we can
Some
still
of the
detect
research.
it.
Yes.
Wow. So unlike protein, fiber
Yes.
has a net positive
Inherently.
yield into the more you take until you start
Yes.
shitting blood, the better.
And we know the mechanistic reasons. It swells up. It slows down gastric emptying. It just slows down the whole passage of food throughout the digestive tract, especially the gastric side, which is where you literally have pressure sensors that essentially measure how full is the stomach. It's like
Yes.
a balloon. In fact, there's research where you blow up a balloon inside somebody's body,
Highly invasive.
highly invasive and highly satiating. When you have the balloon inside you, you are no longer hungry. It's true, because there are literally pressure receptors that are like, how full are we? And the balloon presses on those, and the body's like, we good.
Scott, are you hungry and your diet's going poorly? Yeah. Well, here's our new invention, palatable balloon. Do not breathe it in.
Yeah. So that's mostly the things that really matter. And certain protein sources score really well on that. In particular, energy density. So if something has very few calories per 100 grams, it's inherently more satiating because it has basically the same food volume for fewer calories.
Same pressure sensors, less calories.
Yeah.
So you can, let's say if it's half the calorie density, you can eat double. So you get
Exactly.
double the pressure sensor detection in the stomach,
Yes.
double the hunger control roughly or whatever.
Exactly.
More. And then you are like still eating the same number of calories. And so like, do you have any, sorry, please continue more information because I have follow-up questions here.
For example, egg whites are incredibly satiating.
Oh, but Menno, they suck. Right. That's why they're satiating.
That too. But you can sweeten them and they're still very satiating. So you can make, for example, pancakes with egg whites, and you need the liquid egg whites. Otherwise, you're going to be breaking eggs the whole fucking day.
Yeah, fuck
So when you get the liquid egg whites, you can make like pancakes, wraps or something with that. They are surprisingly satiating. But for me, for example, chicken doesn't do it at all. And if it's a tasty type of meat, it's maybe a little bit better, but I just get hungry from it, if
What
anything.
about fish?
Fish is pretty good, but it depends a lot on the texture. You have a lot of that white fish that is kind of like almost liquidy, like
Yeah, you can just kind of swallow it.
exactly.
Okay, but that's just for you personally.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for most people, it depends more on these types of factors like palatability and how much processing it requires, energy density, much more so than whether it's protein. So a good example, what you already gave, whey shakes are not satiating at all.
Right.
A lot of people actually get hungry from a whey shake. If you're like fasted, you're like, oh no, I'm not that hungry. Have a whey shake. A lot of people actually get triggers more appetite rather than that it actually does anything.
Brings down sympathetic nervous system activity. You go postprandial, bring up parasympathetic. Now you're in recovery mode, but you're under the calories and your body's like, I'm hungry now. Let's get it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see that in research that there are a couple of meta-analyses where they show that protein shakes in particular, they increase net energy intake for most people, showing that it doesn't have like a compensatory response where afterwards you're full and you don't eat anymore. No, it's just additive.
Yes. In the United States, a lot of protein supplements, like if you get a container of powder, it says not a weight loss food, which makes sense.
And many of these protein snacks have that effect. Yeah. So especially the good ones. Like if you have the type of protein bar that it just takes you like 30 minutes to chew through, it's like cardboard.
Yeah.
Maybe satiating because more satiating in the sense of I don't want to eat anymore rather than satiating in the sense of like I'm satisfied.
Right.
But if you have something that's like a really tasty protein bar, you can munch through those and it's just like candy.
Yeah, hell yeah. Anabar. Have you ever tried Anabar?
Mm-hmm.
So
I can tolerate almost any of them due to default maps, the sugar alcohols.
Oh, that's right.
But,
we turn into a rocket ship.
Yeah.
So when we're trying to reduce our calories and not go insane from hunger, we want to lean into lots of high volume fresh veggies or veggies mixed into our food, lots of high volume fresh fruits, lots of whole grains like oatmeal and things like that, especially if they're minimally flavored or unflavored. Like unflavored oatmeal is a motherfucker.
Yeah,
you think you're hungry, you're going to find out real
better
soon.
than most of the other grains.
Oh yeah. And then egg whites and other things like that can really help out. And a really, really big deal is to make sure we're not trying to make our food ultra tasty. The way I like to do it is kind of a sliding scale or a turn dial. As you get deeper into your diet and you are more insane about hunger, you actually turn the tastiness of your food down, but it always stays at roughly the same average of like, perceptively, I like my food, I love eating it, and then afterwards I don't want to eat it anymore. As you're mass gaining and you don't want to eat anymore, you turn up the tastiness of food to keep you right in that middle sweet spot. Because if you turn your diet into like, I hate eating, I hate my life, that sucks. If you turn your diet into I want to eat way more than I can, that sucks. So shooting for that middle by modulating how many of these variables are changing, like fiber intake, fruits, veggies, whole grains. Is there anything about fats or some kind of fats more satiating than others, or just once you take out the variable of palatability, it all kind of is roughly the same?
Yeah, exactly. The fat versus carbs in practice, many foods typically considered high-fat sources are not very satiating.
Per unit of calories.
Per unit
Because that's
of
really
calories.
what we're talking about. Like the ultimate
Yes.
satiating food is 3 pizzas, but
Yes.
like you're doing some
That's
time
a mistake
after
that many governments, by the way, use a lot. They're like, whole grains are the best source of fiber. Yeah, per 100 grams, they score pretty well, but per calorie, they're pretty bad
Yeah.
compared to like vegetables.
Nothing beats like green veggies and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
So what was the question you were asking?
Yeah, I
Before
think
I went off the tangent?
No, I think you answered almost all the questions. Protein at higher levels than what you need just to get jacked does not have an alternate advantage for suppressing
and
hunger.
Fat and carbs also doesn't matter. It's the
Yep.
foods.
Yep.
For example, avocado versus butter, completely different story.
Have you ever tried just eating a stick of butter like it's a candy bar?
Actually, one of the things that my dad taught me about how easy it is to make food tasty, if you just tasty, is by taking a stick of butter, getting some Dutch hagelslag, which is like chocolate sprinkles, and then some sugar. You just mix it,
Yeah.
and it looks grotesque, but it's actually super tasty.
Super tasty.
Yeah.
One of my friends, and actually the current COO of RP, Yasha, who you know well, we've survived India several times together. He was a long time ago, he was working as a waiter at a restaurant. And he was starting to get into fitness, and because he was a little bit overweight and he didn't like that anymore. And then he was like, because you could get like half off or basically free meals at a restaurant if you work there, and you're like one of the waiters, like the guys in the back will cook whatever food for you as long as you're a long shift. And he was like, eating some of the food, and it was quite good. And then at some point he like got more attention to macros and fitness, and he realized that they begin the preparation of one person, Scott, you're going to die when you hear this, one person serving of their take on fettuccine Alfredo, which is quite good. Very good. I noticed that what the cooks do when the meal begins to be constructed is they put the frying pan down and they put one stick of butter in the frying pan. And he was like, hey, how many people is that for? And the guy's like, 1. And he was like, oh my God, that's like 900 calories or something just right off the bat.
Yeah.
And it was like, I eating at restaurants when I don't know the macros is a real good way to just go, get enormous. So yeah, the butter thing. And I mean, it's a huge thing in lots of American cuisine as well. Really all around the world, continental European cuisine. Name a French food that doesn't start with a stick of butter. I'll wait.
Yeah.
Like that's a thing. Yeah.
I tell most of my clients also, when you eat out at a restaurant, your calorie intake is simply X. You can try to guesstimate it, but it's going to be a very rough estimate. And even something like butter or just some more olive oil can mean that your lean chicken breast with veggies actually has 400 extra calories.
Chipotle.
Yeah.
Chipotle is amazing, but their
Chipotle,
rice
and
slides
America,
down your throat with so much oil that you're like, this isn't just rice. But Menno, I want to believe. Every time Jared and I are hanging out, Jared Feather IFB Pro, I'm like, meal? He's like, yeah. Clean meal? He's like, yeah. I'm like, Chipotle? He's like, come on, Mike. Red lightsaber comes out and he usually chops off a part of my body because he's a mean man. Restaurant eating is tough. I'm sure there are places like Subway where because you have total control over what's going in and there's not any oil application, you really can, like lean meats at Subway with whole grain bread or whatever, like you can construct that. But anytime you have ingredients that were pre-prepared, especially carbohydrate ingredients that have some amount of fat used in the cooking, I would just casually assume it's an amount of fat that is absurd for macro people to even consider. Because like if you dude, I had this experience, I'll tell the story real quick. We're at a really fancy steakhouse in Austin, Texas. Amazing experience. And I'm just like, I'm a giant waste of time. Scott could tell you this, of fancy food, because I have like my palate of a 6-year-old with lots of behavioral issues and quirks. And so, I'm at this restaurant and I love pasta dishes. Steak is fine. It's okay. It's not that great. So I just wanted to order a pasta dish. And I told them, can you guys please do like 1/2 of the normal sauce? They brought me the dish. They heard me loud and clear. This is like elite tier steakhouse. They do exactly what you say. Like they don't forget in the kitchen. They do whatever you want. They brought me this pasta and I took like 3 spoonfuls of it and ate it. And I ran out of room in my stomach because I swear to God, there was more sauce than pasta. And I was like, Crystal and I were like, what the fuck is the real version like? Like people are using pasta as a vehicle for sauce. It was wild stuff. So eating out is real tough when you're on a diet in which you want to make the best gains possible and you've been struggling. At that point, probably eating at home is best. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can indulge, and if you are somewhat consistent with your eating out habits, then all that matters is that you know what your body composition change is on a certain type of intake. Even if you don't know what the intake is.
Correct.
If you know that you're losing fat, you're good.
Yep.
If you're gaining weight, okay, you need to slim down in terms of energy intake.
2 burritos a day usually at Chipotle. Now it's 1. Now I lose weight.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Anything we're missing about the protein satiety discussion that you want to add in before we sign off?
No, that's it. I can give you, you said 3 reasons to consume protein. Usually the reasons that are given is it's more satiating, it helps build muscle, and a thermic advantage. There's actually a new meta-analysis just published that came out on this.
Thermic advantage means that when you eat more protein, the protein requires more energy for digestion or other processing, and that energy is actually coming at the expense of some of the protein and potentially even boosting the overall metabolism of your body, such that protein turns into like a junior league fat-burning food. Yep. That seems like one of those women's health magazines in the grocery store titles. Scott, do you want to do a video called 20 Fat-Burning Foods You Didn't Know That You Didn't Know That You Didn't Know About? That'll be the title of this video.
Great.
So that's the thing that works, right? Thermic effect with protein.
It works. There's more energy required in the digestion, absorption, and metabolism of protein than that of carbohydrates and fat. However, the new meta-analysis, they compared like 28 studies on low and high protein intakes. They found that on average, the effect is statistically insignificant in longer duration studies because much of the effect likely comes from increased protein synthesis. If you go up to really high protein intakes, you also have some thermic advantage from increased oxidation. But the synthesis is short-lived. You can't eat your way to the Olympia, right?
No,
you need to actually train as well.
Yes.
So there's something called the muscle full effect. You only get a little bit of protein synthesis if you are undernourished and you didn't get enough protein before. Even an untrained individual, you give them more protein, they'll gain some muscle,
right?
But maybe 1 or 2 kilos. And after that, the protein synthesis stops. That's their new baseline muscle mass. And at that point, the increase in protein synthesis or increase in energy expenditure, total daily energy expenditure or thermic effect of food, basically disappears in these studies. So we see that in acute studies, the effects are overblown compared to the longer duration effects. And it's like 50 calories, 100 if you're really lucky, and really like drastically higher protein intakes. So yeah, that's a nice bonus. But it's not like, oh, if I'm on a cut, I have to consume like 200 grams extra protein, and I'm going to consume protein shakes to make sure that I get that in, and knowing that they're actually not inherently more satiating. Protein shakes aren't very satiating. And yeah, you're burning off maybe 50, 100 extra calories, but you're consuming 500 plus calories to get those.
Yeah, if you don't factor that in, you're just like losing the plot. Yeah, that stinks. It's similar to the kind of effect sizes we see with how many more calories per day you burn on average, having much more muscle mass, but less fat mass at the same body weight. And it's that scientists are still debating whether it's 50 to 100 calories or whether it's a question mark that maybe is 0. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of myths busted today, Menno. There is a problem ravaging America. People with beautiful homes and families.
Is it the imperial system?
Menno, you're going to insult the imperial system on someone else's irrelevant metric podcast. You're 1 inch away from violence. You wouldn't even know what that means, huh? That's why you've been so curt. Caffeine abuse is killing all of us now.
Not just Americans.
Get out of here. There are other people in this world?
I think caffeine is, other than water, coffee, other than water, I think the most consumed beverage in the world. Maybe tea first, but it's up there.
Water, coffee, tea, alcohol. Diet soda. I want it to be diet soda at the top, but Coca-Cola still has not returned my calls or emails or has mailed me back any pictures of them, because I've emailed Coca-Cola and actually physical mailed pictures of myself in various positions with kind words about their product. Nothing, Menno. Nothing.
Yeah.
Not even a fucking phone call. Caffeine abuse. Tell us about what it is. Is it a real thing? Are people getting in trouble for it? How bad is it? Please.
Caffeine is a drug. And commonly abused. That doesn't mean it's like, oh my God, you're all heroin addicts. But it does mean...
But you're all caffeine addicts.
Yeah. And the caffeine addiction is also debated if it's like, should it really be called an addiction? I think it should, because there's withdrawal when you stop taking it. There's tolerance to its use. And those are exactly the problems.
Yeah.
So,
and negative downsides. Yeah. There's a couple of catalogs of what they call an addiction versus not. The quintessential central defining factor of an addiction is, does this thing screw up your life in a way that if you could step back away, would you just turn off? If the answer is yes, but you can't stop taking it, you might be addicted to it, like a net negative that's really gnarly. So How many people are in that situation with caffeine? I suppose quite a few, right? Because it's sleep disturbances. What's the problem here, Menno?
I think most people end up in a more of a neutral situation where the caffeine doesn't do nearly as much positive as they think it does. And they overestimate the positive effects of the caffeine because it reduces the withdrawal symptoms and it compensates for the sleep deprivation, which is partly caused by the excessive caffeine intake.
Yeah.
So there's a meta-analysis from last year, which found that if you don't want to have an objective decrease in your sleep quality, even a single cup of coffee, like 100 milligrams caffeine, you have to consume that on average, depends on how fast you metabolize it. But on average, you have to consume that 9 hours before bedtime and a pre-workout, 13 hours.
I'm not even awake for that long during the day. That is something very many billions of caffeine intakers do not do.
Yep.
Like I remember when Huberman started talking about this kind of situation, a lot of people thought that he was on some old Huberman bullshit again, because, he's great and he gets a lot of shit right, but we say enough, you get some shit wrong. And we were like, oh, Hughes is at it again. And then we all looked at the data and we're like, fucking goddamn it, he's right. And nobody wanted to hear that because how many people, Menno, do you know that at 3 p.m. they get a little slump at work, they hit the espresso machine, and then they're going to bed at 10. I mean, that's in my, maldeveloped brain is 7 hours. I mean, we're not even clear yet. That's a bad deal. A lot of people I know consume caffeine well into the evening hours and can go to sleep. But you're saying their sleep quality is worse.
Yeah, so there are multiple factors to sleep quality. One of them is called sleep latency, which is how long it takes you to fall asleep. But then you have all of these other metrics like the time spent in deep sleep, sleep efficiency, how much REM sleep are you getting? And some of these metrics, they deteriorate with caffeine. And they deteriorate long past the point at which you subjectively feel that you still have a positive effect of the caffeine. And that's important because many people will say, 13 hours, at that point I don't feel anything anymore. And it's like, yeah, you don't. That's right. But your brain's still affected.
Yeah.
There's still activity on these receptors. There's still a difference in how your brain functions. And it's in general more aroused, which is not conducive to sleep.
Scott, did you hear that? What did he say?
Aroused.
Oh my God. I didn't mean to look at your dick.
It's fine.
Did. Damn, dude. Damn, that sucks. Okay, so that's a big downside of caffeine. Is there anything else with excessive caffeine intake? We'll get to what that means in just a second. Yeah. Are there any other problems? Because let's say we have a magic drug developed with the AI revolution coming up in 3 or 4 years. That's the ultimate. It does two things. One, it puts you into hypersleep. As soon as you take it, 20 minutes later, you're getting the highest quality sleep of your life for 8 hours period. Somebody could be poking you with a cattle prod, you wouldn't wake up. And two, it does some kind of magical thing where it completely clears out all caffeine metabolites instantly upon taking it. Is that that's problem solved? We can all do 1,000 milligrams an hour of caffeine, or are there other downsides to high caffeine intake?
The clearing out the metabolites probably actually not enough. There seem to be downstream effects of caffeine beyond that point. But let's say I get your point.
On the nervous system's activity.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's say it undoes those two. Goddamn.
Exactly.
I knew you were going to say that.
So let's say it undoes all of that. Are there still downsides? Well, yes. Caffeine is to be clear, caffeine is nothing like heroin or cocaine or anything like that. It's just a very commonly abused drug that people think is positive and I think is often more neutral, sometimes negative. So I think that more rational strategic use, people can benefit from that.
Management.
Exactly. Some of the downsides, two big ones basically. First, anxiety. Cortisol rises. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. My experience with clients is very much when you ask them, do you have any side effects? They're like, nope, nothing at all. And they don't realize that sleep quality suffers. So they're like, oh, no, nothing. Then I ask them, okay, any visual effects, any physical effects, maybe like trembling hands? They're like, oh yeah, my hands tremble a lot. And I'm like, that's a significant side effect.
That they're just
Yeah, I see that all the time. And bodybuilders in particular. When
bodybuilders take some gnarly dose.
They're used to a lot, especially people on gear, that they're used to a lot more side effects. Yeah. So they're like, oh, hands are trembling. That's fine. Whatever. Yeah.
Still alive.
Yeah. So, but I think the anxiety is a big deal. And I also notice it for certain types of tasks. And research shows this, that your performance you're more energized. So it seems like everything is better on caffeine, but performance on certain tasks is actually worse. Some tasks improve for sure, but performance can deteriorate because of the anxiety and overstimulation. For example, for certain types of work or chess has been studied. Performance on a chess match does not improve for caffeine because you kind of get lost in the details and overfocus
Yes.
And you spend too much time per move.
Yes.
So it's like you get better at things that require intense focus, but the kind of more big picture type reasoning, like time management.
And creativity.
Yes. And the creativity can go both ways on caffeine.
There are several types of creativity. I'll be more specific. Novel generative creativity, for me, in my experience, goes down substantially. Because if you take like your neural networking patterns as kind of like, they've done some computational modeling with this where it looks like a funnel. And it's like a funnel, like 3-dimensional funnel shape. And if you are highly stimulated, you're closer to the base of the funnel, like a very specific subset of thoughts is occurring, which is cool because that's what focus is. And if you have schizophrenia, you're actually not in the funnel at all. You're distributed attention everywhere. So you actually can't even coalesce to like say where you are in space right now. But if you are optimally creative, it's usually somewhere on the borderline between those two. And so if you are very, very caffeinated and you have high anxiety, it ends up being like just one fine focused point in your creativity. I didn't even think one step ahead of what I am now. But if you are not sufficiently caffeinated, you might be ultra hyper creative, which makes you write down tons of great ideas. But someone's like, okay, this idea seed is insanely creative. There's something there. Now develop it. Like you ain't developing shit unless you have 3 cups of coffee in you. So there's kind of a time and a place, like deep focused work. Amazing. Brainstorming sessions, probably not ideal to have a ton of caffeine in you such that you're like laser focused and you're just like, I'll just take notes during this meeting.
Yeah, for creativity, indeed, you get that trade-off where you do get the energy and you do get a positive mood effect. And positive mood in itself usually does improve creativity. But the effect itself of focus is antagonistic to creativity. Creativity requires more of a loose unfocus, if you will. And then there's the second effect, which is negative of creatine. Some research shows
caffeine,
that... Caffeine.
Okay.
What did I say?
Creatine.
Creatine. All right.
How dare you? I will not have you disparage creatine, Joe.
No, that's another actually interaction with creatine for some people potentially. But the cognitively speaking, some research shows that impairment in memory functioning with prolonged high dosage usage. Like I think in the last study it was 450 milligrams per day, so that's like 4 cups of coffee or so. And they showed that working memory performance decreased, and it was associated with some impairments in the hippocampus as well.
Over what time scale?
Couple of weeks.
Do we suspect that that's directly causally entirely explained by the degradation of sleep quality? Because I know sleep is critical to memory formation.
Quite possible. Quite possible.
Okay. At least in part, very likely a candidate hypothesis.
Yes. Yeah. So caffeine is safe, no doubt about that. I'm just saying it has downsides that people probably don't fully acknowledge when they go for the short-term buzz, the short-term energy hit.
Yeah.
So there are some downsides. And in particular, tolerance is a really big one because, like I said, you get into this negative spiral where your sleep suffers and you just need more caffeine to feel the same. And you think that the caffeine makes you feel better, but objectively what happens is it just brings you back to baseline.
Yes.
Like if you were sleeping better,
you just need caffeine to function.
Yeah. So you wake up, you feel terrible. You need the caffeine to feel normal. It seems like every time you take caffeine, you feel better. That's true, but it brings you back to the baseline which you didn't need to do if you were well rested and you weren't using any caffeine at all.
Scott, didn't you live through some shit like this a few months back?
Yes, I quit caffeine and it was very, very difficult. I was fantasizing about energy drinks for like 3 weeks.
You switched to Prime drinks just to have something colorful to drink, right?
Yes. And I started drinking Element in the morning just to fool myself that it was caffeine.
It's that there really is a little bit of a placebo of like, I'm taking something that's going to zazz me. Did you, on the other end of it now, do you feel like your performance cognitively, et cetera, is like pretty good? Or do you miss caffeine? Better. Not just the same, but without the shit sleep. Wow. Less anxiety. Wow. I mean, obviously. Now, Menno, some people, okay, so far what I've learned, and please tell me if this is wrong, is like caffeine can be a net positive and often is, but you have to understand that it has some negatives and it's up to you to manage the dosage and the time of application and to see which negatives you have to try to make sure to wiggle around those. So that all being the case, is there anything where there's a large variation of how people handle caffeine genetically? Can you speak to that? Like, are some people just not for caffeine, whereas others, they're like really the ROI, even at quite high doses, is still very positive?
Yeah, there's substantial variation in particular in how fast we metabolize caffeine, which determines how much we need to get a certain effect. And for me, if I have one Red Bull, I really feel it. And that's partly because of my brain and partly because I'm very sensitive to caffeine. I don't have tolerance. Or very little.
Just because you don't consume much.
Yes. Most research finds that the average individual can consume like a Red Bull per day or a coffee per day. And you don't really get substantial tolerance. I actually do notice that I get a little bit less effect, and it's very easy to tell. You just don't use it for a couple of days, and then you use it and you're like, whoa, is this what one can does?
Yeah.
And it's funny because some research says you don't develop tolerance. And the research they cite for that is research where they consume a very large bolus of caffeine, usually like 6 cups of coffee or 3 cups of coffee, the equivalent of that, like 300 to 600 milligrams. And they say, oh, look, even in habitual users, they still get an effect of that. It's like, yeah, if your total daily intake is normally 300 milligrams, like 3 cups of coffee spread throughout the day with meals, so you don't get these big spikes in activity. And then one time you consume 3 cups at once, you do get an effect, sure. But if you look at the studies where you consume a certain dosage of caffeine over time and you see how much effect there is of that, that aligns perfectly with people's anecdotal experience. You feel the effect less.
Yes, of course. I don't just, there's no point debating that because just drink coffee for a while and see if it still has the same effect. It won't.
Exactly.
Okay. So different genetics. I imagine because genetic variability is so multifactorial that there are definitely some people that experience much less and much more sleep disruption from caffeine. How do you know if you're doing caffeine wrong, and what do you change to improve? Yes, we always know you can just quit. That's the last time we'll mention it. I don't drink caffeine, for the record. I'm not a caffeine shill. I just don't drink it almost ever because I'm quite awake enough by my fucking self, arguably too much. However, just on the management side, how do I know? Like right now, people are listening to this and they're like, am I doing too much? Can you tell me more best practices of how to figure out if I'm doing too much and also how to fix my caffeine thing, or maybe by reduction or maybe by dosing arrangement, I can do better?
I think there are a couple of good questions to ask yourself, which are the same questions that any addict should ask themselves if they are an addict.
Jesus Christ, we're leaning into this. I love it.
Yeah, for one, are you using it with a specific goal in mind? Like I use caffeine as a pre-workout or for specific work bouts, like a specific type of work that I need a focused energy session for. So I know exactly what I'm going to do in the hours after the caffeine use to take advantage of the pharmaceutical effect of the drug. If you're using it just to take it, that's an indication. That's a lot. Now, maybe you consume coffee for the taste. I would say at least try decaf coffee.
It's fucking amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh no, I never, that's terrible. It has no taste. And then in blind research, you see a lot of people actually do kind of like it or they can't even tell.
Right.
Yeah. So certainly some people can tell. But yeah, something for you to consider for yourself. Another consideration is if you don't get your caffeine, do you function normally? Because if you, in the morning, you wake up and you're just a fucking zombie until you have your shots of caffeine in there, that to me doesn't sound particularly ergogenic. Like you're not really improving much. You've become dependent on it almost per definition.
And very likely it's either that you are dependent on caffeine and or your sleep is so degraded that really the problem you should be fixing is a sleep quality.
Yes.
Because some people, like you said earlier, the caffeine destroys the sleep quality. Then they needed to overcome that. But if you pull back on the caffeine, your sleep quality improves. You're actually like, oh, wow, I actually don't need any more coffee than a cup in the morning because now that I'm getting really good sleep, it's all much better.
Yep. So I think those are questions that are very important. The effect you get from a serving as well. If you notice it's decreasing, it's probably good to just take a few days off. The good thing about caffeine, addiction, tolerance, however you want to call it, is that even in extreme cases, 9 days is enough for full resensitization of your receptors.
Oh, full in 9 days.
Yeah. And if it's less, if you're used to maybe 2 cups of coffee, just 3 days is enough for most of the effect.
So if someone is on holiday and at work, they're cranking caffeine because they have to, whatever job they do, 1 week vacation, you would say like, just don't consume any caffeine. And if you have to consume caffeine on a vacation, you just really misarchitected the idea of vacation. And if you have a headache from withdrawal symptoms, just take headache medicine.
Yep. And for example, if I have an international flight, I'm not going to take caffeine to watch movies on the plane. Right. I'm going to use that day to resensitize to make sure I get the full pre-workout effect on my other days. One thing for pre-workout usage, by the way, is, so we've talked about the negatives. I think a lot of people argue, well, the positives outweigh the negatives, but the positives are not nearly as large as many people think. Long-term research shows no effect on strength development, muscle growth, fat loss, in large part because of the tolerance. There's no increase in energy expenditure. It's too short-lived. The tolerance negates pretty much all of it. So the effect on performance is something that is a bit more consistent, but it's mostly psychological. In fact, most of the effect of caffeine is placebo. There have been studies where they look at how much of an effect people get either on cognitive tasks, so like mental tasks, or physical tasks. And then you see that people that think they are on caffeine but got a placebo, they got more effect than the people that got caffeine but didn't know they were on it.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how much caffeine you can give people, especially people used to caffeine, without them being able to tell if they were in the caffeine or placebo group.
Holy shit.
Like
I'd be able to tell
600,
you that,
300 milligrams.
Right away. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Last question for you, Menno. How many milligrams if my sleep is good?
Mm-hmm.
I've tried taking less caffeine, no big effect. I like caffeine. I like drinking coffee or Monsters or whatever the hell. What is the milligram per day dose and the time of cutoff that you're like, it doesn't matter how you feel. Don't go this much caffeine per day,
mm-hmm.
and probably stop drinking caffeine at the latest XYZ hours before you go to sleep, even if everything seems fine.
If you really want to be safe, I would go with the meta-analysis of like 9 hours for a cup of coffee, 13 hours for a pre-workout with like 200 milligram caffeine. And other than that, 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight is kind of the safe dosage, which is about 100 milligram per day, like 1 cup of coffee, 1 energy drink, like a normal energy drink, not like a Monster XXL.
Mm-hmm.
That's about the dosage where we know that the average individual doesn't develop tolerance. We know that from cognitive tasks, as well as one long-term study for exercising individuals. Some people can certainly handle more if you're the type of individual where you have a Red Bull and just don't feel anything, not because you're tolerant, but because you just process it super fast.
After 9 days, you have a Red Bull and you still can't feel shit.
Exactly. In that scenario, see how much you need to get a robust effect. That's basically the equivalent of 100 milligrams for you. And that's probably the dosage you can sustainably use.
Sorry for the bad news, folks. All right, Menno.
For most people, it's indeed a bit of a downer, but I would see it as an opportunity for improvement, because how you feel now, how your life is now, you can improve on that.
Yes.
At the very least, you can get the same results with less reliance on caffeine.
Yeah. And we're not talking about life and death type of stuff. Like,
exactly. It's optimization.
You can keep cranking caffeine and you'll be totally fine.
You can be a very productive caffeine addict.
100%. And it's not going to screw up your life or take years off your life. But if you want to like consume less caffeine and get exactly the same effects or even some better sleep and recovery, consider doing less caffeine. Okay, Menno. How long should we rest between sets in order to get jacked and in order to get strong? Been many, many opinions over the years. It's swayed from 3 to 4 minutes to really get full recovery between sets, all the way down to seconds, as long as you get the total reps you need over the workout, however you get 70 reps, whether it's very, very tiny little micro myo-rep sets or tons of big sets. It doesn't matter. What is your take on this? What literature informed it? Tell us a story.
So rather than give you an exact number, I think it's much more important to understand the principle, because there's something that people hate to hear, and it's called context. And
don't bother telling us. We hate to hear it.
Yes. So I could tell you, 2 to 3 minutes for muscle hypertrophy and full recovery for strength, something like that. That's probably a good general guideline. But what you really need to know is that when you rest longer, your nervous system recovers, your muscles recover, you can do more work in the next set. That extra work will translate into greater muscle hypertrophy, provided you can recover from it. For strength development, it's almost always a net positive, especially energy, substrate depletion and the like. They have to fully recover. The creatine phosphate system has to recover, which takes a couple minutes to 3 minutes, because you want maximal performance, you want maximal muscle activity to train for strength. It's actually the muscle activity that's more indicative, or it's more stimulatory for strength development, as it teaches the nervous system how to coordinate the movement, how to maximize muscle activity. That's what you want for strength development, maximum performance. So for strength, basically, the longer you rest, the better your results. Research
until you cool down or something.
Yeah. You don't. 5 minutes is pretty much what most people need. After that, you get really sharp diminishing returns at best. But some people don't fully recover. So, some people say rest until you're literally fully recovered. For some people, that would mean, okay, rest 3 days.
Yeah.
Right? Not 5 minutes.
Right.
But in 5 minutes, you get the vast majority of the effect. Your reps are maybe 1 lower than the previous set or something. So for strength, it is generally good to try to plan in long rest intervals. For muscle hypertrophy, it really doesn't matter if you rest long. It's about how much total work you get in. Like with strength, you just can't get the same quality of work, and you cannot compensate for that by just doing myo reps or rest pause sets or all of that stuff. So for strength, it's a bit more non-negotiable. But for muscle hypertrophy, you have a lot more leeway. And you can either do, and research quite clearly shows this in some studies, you can either do fewer sets with more rest, or you can do more sets with less rest. And the efficiency of that is actually higher. So that is where context matters. If you want to do a certain amount of sets, and you do, for example, like I do mostly full body workouts, and I do them as a combo set, which is like a circuit where I do rest in between sets. It's extremely time efficient because I can do, say, 4 exercises that are unrelated. I rest only 1 minute in between those exercises. But that means that by the time I get back to the same exercise, so by the time I get back to training my biceps again after chin-ups, I've rested probably 6+ minutes. And in between every exercise, I've only rested 1 minute. That's extremely time efficient. So if you're doing it like that, then yeah, increasing your rest interval for in between exercising the same muscle group is generally positive. But if you're on, say, the leg extension machine and nothing else is available, and you just have to do another set of leg extensions, and you only have an hour to work out, you probably don't want to rest 6 minutes in between your sets of leg extensions because it's very time inefficient. So you're better off doing maybe 2 minutes and then doing an additional set if needed, because your total rep count is going to be higher.
And that's what really matters.
That's what matters. It's tension multiplied by time under tension. That's roughly the thing that drives muscle growth. It's like the total area under the curve, or the integral for the mathematicians, of tension, mechanical tension on the muscle. That's the primary stimulus for muscle growth.
That makes sense. And even if it's a metabolite situation, you just secrete more metabolites, the more tension you apply, so that scales. If it's a pump situation, it scales roughly the same. It's also trippy because people say, well, you get a better pump if you do short rest breaks. Like, I don't know if you've ever trained that hard, because if you get short enough rest breaks, you gas out before you can really pump the muscle and take it really close to its own local failure. But if you take longer rest breaks, but you take every set real close to failure for decent reps, you get crazy pumps. You actually get a better pump between sets over a couple of minutes, and then you get an even bigger pump after and after and after. So even for all those other variables, even if we're saying there's other things involved in growth than tension, as long as you're not limited by things that don't have to do with a local muscle producing force, you can rest as little time as you like. So what that means is this: if you are doing calf raises, and after 15 seconds of rest after the last set, your calves feel great and you can do another 5 to 10 reps at least, you can go and you'll basically miss out on nothing. But if you're doing squats for sets of 15 and after one set of squats, you rest 30 seconds and you go again, you actually won't reach muscular failure on the next set in many cases. You'll reach lung failure. You just can't breathe anymore and you have to rack. And then we're actually not training close to failure at the local level. And potentially those reps aren't junk volume, but they're more junky volume. Thoughts?
Yeah, because those reps will probably not achieve the same level of muscle activity and tension.
Right, especially the faster fibers.
Yes.
The faster fiber tension is much less exposed because the faster fibers recover less quickly between sets. And then you'll have a situation where you're only using your slower fibers for squats, which is why instead of 15 reps in the second, you got 5. But even though there are 5 reps, your faster fibers are smoking a cigarette the whole time. They're like, the fuck, we can't even turn on for this shit. And then you actually are costing yourself. So if you feel like you can use the local muscle to generate lots of force, you've rested long enough. And if you feel like, I need more time because psychologically I need to clue in better, my cardio needs to be better, maybe a limiting factor. So for example, should you go and do another set of pull downs? Well, how do your lats feel? Back feels pretty good. What about your forearms? Like, my forearms are still kind of pumped and kind of burning. Like, well, you should take more time because you don't want to reach failure in your forearms. If you've checked all those boxes, and you can do another 5 to 10 reps on the next set, you can easily condense your workout to have much shorter rest, which tends to work better in like isolating biceps and triceps and delts and forearms and calves, less well for things like the back and the chest. It'll get you out of breath. And for legs, hamstrings in a machine you can get away with. Quads in extensions you can get away with, although leg extensions taken close to failure for 15 to 20 reps can really fuck you up cardio-wise too. But things like squats and bent rows and cleans, you're going to want a longer break to just have the higher quality of sets, yeah?
Yeah. For most individuals, it's going to be at least a minute. Just the local fatigue is going to require some time. But it varies so much per individual that I agree that auto-regulating your rest interval, so going by feel in this case, and thinking when you feel ready for maximal performance again, or at least to give it maximal effort again, is a good guideline. Because
great distinction.
Yeah, most people, women recover a lot faster than men. People that are not as strong recover faster than people that are much stronger. You see some differences with age. The exercise is a huge effect, as you said. So because of all these factors, it's very hard to give like a guideline. Plus, it's super impractical. Nobody wants to walk around the gym with a fucking stopwatch, right? Even the people
I know people that do that and they love it because it keeps them on track.
Yeah, but even
so
the people that do,
it's cool.
They often don't really go by it. You see the alarm go off and then they like take a sip. And
why is that even on? I think a lot of people do it because I've heard from people, and there are people that like that, and massive respect to them for figuring this out. They get, if I don't have a stopwatch, I'll dilly-dally for like an inordinate amount of time. And so the stopwatch just basically punts me in the dick and says, hey, shut up and go lift.
And that's actually supported by some research that people dilly-daddle a bit too much. Like it's good to rest until you feel ready for maximal performance, but you can probably push yourself a little bit more than that. So it's already quite safe to rest until that point. People rest a little bit excessively on average.
On average. Yeah. So what you're saying is if you feel like you're resting enough, you're probably resting enough.
Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. Strength training, obviously the workout quality gets much better, faster fiber recruitment, much better. And so for hypertrophy training, like if you're not gassed out and your local muscles feel like they're ready to go and you feel psychologically strong, feel free to hit it again. You can always rest longer. Your gym session is going to take longer for no extra benefit. Whereas for strength training, you want to figure out when you're feeling pretty damn good and give yourself another maybe 30 seconds extra just to really collect yourself to make sure you're doing a good job. Yeah.
Yeah. And really think of your performance. Like, don't aim for 10 reps instead of 15 from the last set. Really try to go for the 15 again. And for strength, probably you're more like 5 and going for 5 again.
Well, the thing with strength is if you're doing squats or you're doing deadlifts and you under rest by 30 or 40 seconds, it can take what you're supposed to do another set of 5 and turn it into a set of 2.5. Yep. And then you're like, oh shit, this actually does not work in this case. So strength training takes a longer time.
Yes.
Inherently, never mind that the warm-ups take a longer time and everything.
Yep.
That makes a ton of sense.
Exercise intensity also has a big effect. Like higher rep work is easier to recover from in terms of acute fatigue. It's actually harder to recover from in the long term, interestingly. But if you do squats, you have a few things going for you. One, you're training a very big part of your body at the same time. Second, you're using a very high intensity. If you're training for strength, like usually 1 to 5 reps is more like strength work. So both of these factors work against you in terms of requiring a longer period. And then on top of that, you want very good recovery in between set, not just like okay recovery, but actually going for almost the same level of performance again. So yeah, then you need a lot more rest.
Yeah. Hypertrophy work beats the body into submission. And as long as it's awake enough for the beating, you're good. Mm-hmm. Strength work is better seen as showing off. Every set you're showing off.
Quality versus quantity.
Yes. Anything else to say about rest intervals that folks are maybe misunderstanding out there that they could use better insight for?
I think there was some confusion with the latest meta-analysis that seemed to find like 90 seconds being optimal. But I think that's a misunderstanding from the literature that for one, the data really were not very clear on what the analysis showed. They basically showed benefits over 60 seconds. And then beyond that point, it was kind of unclear. So I would say that 90 seconds is more like an average sweet spot in terms of time efficiency for people, rather than that actually there's any benefit of resting less long. Like mechanistically, longer rest can only be good. The only question is time efficiency.
Time efficiency. Yeah. And from time efficiency standard, we know that, especially for hypertrophy work, if you're getting in the reps and the target muscle is a limiting factor, cutting your rest times substantially improves your efficiency. Mm-hmm. So for strength work, a little bit extra is usually good. For hypertrophy work, if you're still getting the reps in and you feel the muscle getting limited and you don't have a ton of time to spend in the gym, you can kind of get cracking and get really, really good gains without having to spend, minutes and minutes and minutes between exercises.
Yeah. And people that want to get in like the granular details, I wrote a review on this, like a scientific paper. You can check that out. We also did a study together with Brad Schoenfeld where we were one of the first to quite decisively show, or at least to show very strong data in support of the fact that 3 minutes is better than 1 on average for muscle growth. And then the subsequent research also found greater protein synthesis. And then the best study probably you have is by Longo et al., where they show that it's the total volume regardless of the rest period. So they had a lot of different groups where they really show compellingly like it's the total reps that you end up with for the workout. That's the driver of muscle growth.
Muscle growth. I got it. That makes perfect sense. All right. Next question. When we talked before you came here and we arranged all the questions in advance,
it's a setup.
We're going to flip the script on you. We're going to show you a video that was taken when you didn't know. And no, just kidding. Maybe. Diet myths is the only clue I have in my brain about what we're talking about. There are no doubt dozens and dozens of diet myths, but Menno, you have a knack for being the first, if not one of the first people to question myths and assumptions in practice that almost nobody else has ever questioned. And many times you end up correct. Sometimes you end up marginally making a good point on the net balance, not overall super big point, but it's always incredibly awesome to have you in the industry, because in the industry, like with any social group, a lot of people start to nod their heads and everyone's friends and evidence-based guys are all cool people. You don't want to like call people out or disagree with them, but you have the Dutch side of you, which is 100% of you, that will raise your hand and call out inconvenient, uncomfortable truths. So these diet myths that you're going to share with us, no doubt are going to probably insult me and my intellect. Earlier, you punched Scott the video guy in the face just for sport. Tell us things that will upset us about diet myths. One
thing which people should be familiar with on the RP channel is carbs and fats. Doesn't really matter, just energy intake. I think that's pretty established now in evidence-based fitness, but there's still like a huge camp of people with the insulin model and all that stuff. And research is just very clear that total energy intake is what drives whether you're losing fat or not. If you're in energy deficit, your body it's thermodynamic law, it's physics. Your body has to get rid of some of the energy from its own body. If you're strength training, there should be fat. So whether you're keto dieting or high carb dieting, fat loss is dictated by your energy intake versus energy expenditure, not by whether you're doing keto, by your insulin levels, by whether you eat clean, by whether you eat paleo, vegan. None of that stuff matters independent of energy intake.
If you get enough protein, carbs and fats are more of a how you feel and how you perform question than a mechanistically what's going to let you lose more fat question.
Yes.
What about muscle gain? Can I keto my way up to tons and tons of muscle on a very low carbohydrate diet? And why don't we see in the real world almost anybody doing this?
That's a good question. I'm currently probably in the minority of people in evidence-based fitness that thinks you can actually get maximum muscle growth on low carbohydrate intakes. There's a previous meta-analysis from Vargas et al., which found exactly this, that keto diets on average result in similar fat-free mass accretion as non-keto diets. I'm currently performing a meta-analysis which is more broad, not just keto versus non-keto, but like literally every study that we have on higher versus lower carbohydrate intakes. And we have a randomized controlled trial going live this summer where we look at this in more detail. But the current literature shows that you typically get similar gains when you control for energy intake. Now, why don't people do this? Why don't we see more people like keto individuals getting super jacked? Well, actually, there's one on my team, Luis Villasenor. He's super jacked.
Can't keep bringing up Luis. He's the only jack dude that does keto.
Pretty much, yeah.
I'm kidding, but...
So, yeah. But there are not many people doing keto in the first place, right? So the base rate's already very low.
Sure.
And high carb is kind of the popular thing these days. Whereas actually up until the 50s or so, low carb diets were more popular.
Sure.
So natural bodybuilders have by and large done more low carb than high carb diets. In any case, what we do see clearly in the research is that when you try to mass, as you would say, I would say lean bulk or bulk, it's very difficult on a keto diet. You just have a very limited restriction, a very limited set of food choices. There's the appetite suppression that for some people comes with a ketogenic diet. And especially when your fat intake has to exceed your protein intake, you just get into crazy diets where you have to you have to do crazy stuff like put butter in your coffee, things nobody would ever think of doing.
Yeah.
Right? So we see that in research. Even when in a research study, we tell people like, hey, you have to consume this many calories, but you have to do it keto. And they're like, okay, no, got it. And then they're like 400 calories short. And you're like, bro. And I was like, I tried.
Yeah. I want you to address a specific subsection of this myth. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a lot of inference and conjecture, which is totally fine. That's our best model until we have really good data. The big thing I see this impacting is, of course, we're not going to tell people to do keto bulk. That's fucking stupid. I mean, if you want to, rock out, but good luck. There are lots and lots of people that when they're bulking, they're trying to keep their carbohydrates as the main driver of caloric load. Mm-hmm. And their fats to roughly minimum levels. So we're talking about someone who's eating 250 grams of protein a day, jacked bodybuilder guy, 600 grams of carbs per day, and 75 to 100 grams of fat at the highest intake, sometimes 50 to 75 grams of fat for extra bonus points, something insulin.
Mm-hmm.
I found some of those hypotheses with insulin drive compelling in the past. Nowadays, I still find them compelling, but no longer particularly swaying. I think maybe there's something there, maybe there's not.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm doing a diet where I'm trying to get 75 grams of fat for every 600 grams of carbs, it limits my ability to be flexible and to enjoy my life to a substantial degree. I'm not saying for me, for the average human.
Mm-hmm.
Because holy shit, there's only so much chicken and rice you can eat on your bulk until you're like, I'm never bodybuilding ever again.
Yes.
And at the very least, it sours your mood daily and it allows less flexibility. And if you have more fun living the bodybuilding life, then you just get more jacked.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of universally accepted standard in lifting for the bro communities. A lot of pro bodybuilders, very good bodybuilders, you'll tell them, like, science says you're lifting like in a way that's slightly suboptimal. They're like, this is how I love to do it. And this is what keeps me in the game. Then you're like, respect, total respect. But then you tell them, like, you don't need to eat very few grams of fat on your bulk. And they're like, you just don't know things. And this is the suffering that is required. Is there a contradiction in terms there? Is this totally baseless, Menno? And if I'm telling you, look, if I eat 500 grams of carbs instead of 600, but now instead of 100 grams of fat per day, I'm eating 150, the amount of variety and tastiness of food that I can accommodate is like infinitely higher.
Mm-hmm. I
can even go out every few days and eat roughly normal, like clean-ish. My wife and I have been bullshitting to each other that we might make a stupid cookbook in the future called Halfway Healthy, which is you take normal recipes like mac and cheese and you just cut the fat by half, which means there's still a shitload of fat in there, but they're way better macros, but still really good. Halfway healthy recipes all of a sudden are super easy. Chicken thighs, all kinds of cuts of beef, all sorts of stews are totally fine to eat if you can eat 150 grams of fat per day, but at 75 or 100, you're like, this is mostly just like fish and rice at this point. Is there anything in your mind that if someone's like, look, Menno, you're an esteemed guy, you know your shit, do I just not eat fats almost at all out of my bulk? Or if I eat like 150 grams of fat and adjust for calories, same calories, a little bit less carb, a bit more fat, am I missing out on anything? What would you say to that?
No, absolutely not. I think it's extremely unlikely that there's any effect with those intakes. Like in the research, we're really looking at the very low carb intakes, whether those are detrimental. We did a systematic review on the amount of carbohydrate intake that's required to maximize strength development earlier. Now we're working on muscle growth. And it's 17 out of 17 studies essentially not finding any effect on strength development. So the evidence is really sparse. It's the potential benefits of carbohydrates are really a distant extrapolation from research showing acute effects on performance. And again, often in studies of kind of like what we see with protein now with the meta-analyses, carbs versus nothing, just like protein versus nothing. Well, of course, the carbs do better. In many of these scenarios, it's literally overnight fasted workout versus one group had breakfast, they got carbs.
One group got food.
Yeah, exactly. Or even sometimes in some of the studies, you see that it doesn't even have to be food. Or it can be food like a placebo breakfast they use.
Yes. Scott, who do we have on that was saying that kind of jazz?
Data-driven strength. I believe it was Jake.
Yes, the data-driven strength guys were saying that they're amazing guys, highly recommended. They were saying that like actually what determines your workout performance is do you psychologically feel empty or feel full? Mm-hmm. If you're full, you'll perform really well. If you feel empty, even if technically speaking, you're all loaded with everything, you might not do so well because your stomach's like, hey, idiots, stop lifting weights and go eat something. Mm-hmm. That makes a ton of sense. So to you, basically like if someone tried eating 600 grams of carbs per day and only 75 fats, and their bulk is really fucking miserable and they're thinking of quitting bodybuilding, to you, where this is the only point at which you would tell them eat more carbs is the point at which carbohydrates have just more advantages for performance and overall feel. So you would tell them, look, try go down to 500 grams of carbs, eat roughly 50 grams more fats, see how you feel, then try, 450 or 400 grams of carbs and eat a lot more fats, see how you feel and kind of go from there. Would that be your recommendation?
Yeah, and the chance of needing carbohydrates is very low if you're not doing strength training with at least 10 sets per muscle group per session. So if you're doing a bro split, ironically, and we actually also see this anecdotally, I think, you actually need a higher carbohydrate intake because your glycogen depletion per session might actually get to the point of critical levels for neuromuscular performance.
That makes sense. So if you're doing a bro split, you're doing 20 sets of chest.
Yeah.
The last few sets of chest, you had better be on a high carb diet. Otherwise, they start to suck.
Yes. Which is kind of funny, right? Because most people attribute like a full body workout with more like cardio type properties.
Yeah.
But you don't deplete that much glycogen per muscle group.
Correct.
And that's what matters.
Yes.
It's the glycogen that's stored in a certain muscle group that's available to that muscle group. And the enzymes are lacking in the body to transfer that on an acute basis to another muscle group.
Yeah.
So it's just how much glycogen is in there. And it's also not how much glucose is in your blood right now. It's really how much glycogen is already stored in there before you go into the workout. That's like the reservoir, the vat of energy that the muscle has to pull into for glycolytic energy production, which is like high intensity energy production.
I think most of the super high carb stuff from pro bodybuilding comes from a use of exogenous insulin, which has some necessities for higher carbohydrate intake and some really cool synergistic pathways that simply just don't yield much in normal amounts. And also maybe the bro split is one of them in addition to that. And of course, I would never discount status quo bias as a reason why people do things. Like some people just do things because people did them in this way, and then you tell them a new way and they're like, nah, but then everyone else is doing it. They're like, oh, that's the new way. And now they do it.
Yeah. And the status quo bias is particularly large for people that have, for trends that show fashion effects or cyclical effects. And that's the case with a lot of things in fitness. Like a lot of people think, everybody thinks this way. It's like, yeah, now they do.
Yeah.
4 years ago, that was not the case at all.
Yes.
And 4 years later, that might not be the case anymore either.
Yes. I actually have a few folks in the comment sections will sometimes say like, everything we needed to know about lifting, we already knew in the 90s. And I just want to tell them like, you need someone to talk to that'll hold you real tight and explain the world to you. But they do sometimes have a really excellent point that because some of these things are cyclical, like Scott and I did a review of Lou Ferrigno's workout, and legitimately like almost everything he said was like better than the shit today. He just happened to be on one of those waves of like knowledge and understanding. He's like, you got to control the weight. You got to do an eccentric. Everything's meaningful, like focus, blah, blah. And we were like, man, Lou had it figured out. So sometimes you're just cherry picking, right, of whatever decade you liked before. Menno, is there any problem? So, okay, with carbohydrates, bodybuilders know they're supposed to be healthy carbs. Like no one's saying eat a bunch of fucking low fat cheesecake and that's how you're going to get 600 grams of carbs. But fats, if I'm saying, okay, fine, Menno Henselmans, he's got excellent hair. I love his accent. I'll try to do what he says. I'm going to reduce my carbs a little bit, increase my fats when I'm bulking. Is there a kind of source of fats priority that you would say is probably better for health and maybe performance and maybe muscle growth? And is there maybe, because like obviously I'm not just going to go to like Hardee's and eat 5 triple cheeseburgers, though that might be fun for the soul, maybe not as good for the muscles. What do you think? Interestingly,
there's some research that certain fatty acids are indeed more conducive towards muscle growth. And it seems to be largely the same ones that are good for health. So that's nice. That's a positive. Omega-3s are a big one that stands out. Not massive effects, but we do have multiple studies showing increased muscle protein synthesis, sometimes lean mass accretion, strength gains, recovery. So lots of good stuff there. Again, effect sizes, small stuff, but a wide range of potential benefits, plus the health benefits, some cognitive benefits. So I would say omega-3s are a really good one. And then mostly monounsaturated fatty acids have some promising effects, also for fat loss, interestingly.
I was on this train decades ago and people shat on me then. And now look who's good.
Yeah, they have some benefits for fat loss, thermogenic effects. Again, small stuff, but compared to saturated fats, there are some studies finding benefits.
Yeah.
And polyunsaturated fats in general, or unsaturated fats in general.
Unsaturated fats, both mono and poly.
Yeah, have a trend in some research. Even in acute studies where people are not lifting, they give them polyunsaturated fats versus saturated fats. And they actually gain more lean body mass.
I've seen those studies.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff because we don't really see that in the exercise science studies.
Yeah.
So it's hard to explain. But we actually have multiple studies showing that people that consume more polyunsaturated fats gain more lean body mass.
Yeah.
So, and also some associative data. I wouldn't put too much stock into those, but yeah, combined with the potential health benefits versus like just going all in on saturated fats, which is like the carnivore approach for people that just want to consume meat and eggs. And
you just have a lot of manhood energy, and I feel that. So things like nuts, natural nut butters, olive oil, canola oil, and avocado oil, things like the hipster fats, like Whole Foods fats. Those are pretty good for getting you jacked. Ironically, because you're not going to find a lot of jacked people at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
mostly because they're not wild, stupid animals like us and piss away their time lifting weights.
Yeah. And then there's a little bit of basis to not completely neglect saturated fat intake.
Of course.
Because it's helpful for cholesterol and testosterone production.
Yes.
So theoretically, over the long run, you might get some small benefits from that.
Couple eggs a day probably was well on the way to do that.
Yeah, just 2 actually will already pretty much get you the maximum cholesterol intake that is beneficial for muscle growth in some research. Cholesterol actually improves muscle growth in some studies.
If you're very low on cholesterol, it will.
Yeah, mostly that indeed. And the research is not super clear, but potentially some benefits of an egg or 2 a day.
Yeah. So basically, TLDR, try to experiment with higher fats and slightly lower carbs when you're bulking. You may discover that you get even better gains or similar gains with way more diet flexibility. You can go out to eat with your friends more often, and even sticking to healthy foods, you can have just better food, tastier food, and even some better health outcomes because of the pretty decent health effects of those really high quality monounsaturated, some polyunsaturated, and omega-3 kind of fats.
Yeah, omega-3 and monounsaturated fats in particular have a really good record for health benefits.
Yes, I love it. All right. Our last topic for today, many myths that we've run into. Maybe the most painful myths are the ones that hit the closest to home. Like if you thought dragons were real, but they weren't.
Oh, yeah, that one hurt.
It did hurt when you were 8. But as an adult.
For me, it was more like last week, actually.
Last week.
Yeah.
You looked at the phylogenetic record and you were like, 6 limbed animals are almost entirely missing. Damn it.
Yeah.
However, probably the most painful myths are the ones that impact our gains directly. And the most painful of those are the ones that leave us with less jacked arms than we could have had. I mean, damn. And recently I've been talking to a few people and they keep telling me that shoulders are more important to have than arms for like sex appeal. And I would love to hear them, but my arms are so big. I just don't care what they're saying. So please help me not have skinny loser arms that get me pushed into the locker at school. What myths are out there about bicep and tricep training that we really want to attend to and not have to commit ourselves so that we get bigger arms? Finally, for once in our life, something will work.
I think for biceps training, the way many people go about it is they have like their dumbbell curls, their barbell curls, and then a bunch of compound movements. And what they really neglect is the lengthened position. So you do a really good job of that with your exercise selection, of doing exercises, which can be with a dumbbell, like incline curls, where you make sure that there's still tension in the bottom, Bayesian curls, cable curls. If you preacher curls can be pretty good. The biceps is a bit shortened, but you do get high tension in the bottom position. So concentration curls and then leaning back. That's also really good. You can get pretty high. You need a combination of high muscle lengths and high tension at long lengths. Those seem to be kind of equally important. And it's kind of like you can think of them as a multiplier effect. You can either have very high tension in the bottom, and then even if the muscle's not that lengthened, you get a pretty good effect. You get probably the best effect, at least in theory, if you get both, like long lengths and then high tension there. For the biceps, this is quite well demonstrated, including a meta-analysis that on average at longer lengths, there was more muscle growth, at least with isometric contractions, than at shorter lengths. And that's exactly what you're not doing with most compound exercises, dumbbell curls, barbell curls. In the bottom position with a dumbbell or a barbell curl, because of gravity, there's no tension on the biceps.
Functionally, close to zero.
Now you can do it like Jared, where you push up the elbows to the front. I like that.
Lipstick on a pig. You're just like, have you ever heard that term?
No.
That's right. You're not American. Putting lipstick on a pig, something is already ugly. You put lipstick on and it makes it a little bit better, but it doesn't matter like, as much as you would like. Obviously, like 4 curls like that, it definitely makes barbell and dumbbell curls better. But if you could do them at a different angle and have maximum tension instead of just a little bit more tension, you'd be even better still.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's in general, you can't really go wrong with it, and it might be beneficial. So lengthened biased exercises for the biceps are probably very underrated and underused.
What are your favorites?
I like Bayesian curls a lot because you can basically adopt the resistance curve exactly to how you want it. And you can let your elbows come back further if you want, just move yourself further to the front. The incline curls that you do, where you're not just on a bench and the arm is straight down, you actually go so far down that the arm is still kind of diagonal in the bottom position, so that you still have tension, right? Because if the arm is vertical in the bottom position with any free weight, there's no more tension on the biceps.
Right. At least there's a big stretch. but not a ton of tension. Whereas if just with standing curls instead of incline curls, there's neither tension nor a stretch.
Exactly.
And so incline curls are better, but flat bench curls are even better. And technically speaking, even though it's really annoying, although if you have a decline ab machine where you can hook in your legs, that's probably one of the best places to do dumbbell curls in, because at the very bottom, it's both maximally stretched and very close to the highest force you'll experience.
Yeah, I like those. Some people get, their shoulders don't like it as much. In that case, just reduce the stretch a little bit.
Yeah, or just start lighter with higher reps and work in. I like, now I'm doing like, sometimes I even use the 30s, but when I started, I was doing the 15s and getting excellent stuff. I tried the 20s and I was like, my delts are like, nah, you're good, bro. Or my glenohumeral joint was like, we're good. But now I do the 20s, I do the 25s on one day and the 30s on another, and I feel great. So a lot of times when people say, oh, this bothers my XYZ joint, one of the problems they're usually committing is they just like went right into crazy loading. And if they just worked into it, your body gets used to almost everything.
Yeah. Another myth, common mistake I see is in how people count the volume for the biceps. So some people will go so far as to say compound work doesn't count. And then other people are like, yeah, no, compound work is all you need. And the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Both equally wrong.
Yeah.
And equally right.
Yeah. And it also depends on the type of exercise, because we see in research that if you have a fixed implement, like a barbell, something that not like a dumbbell where you can move both arms independently, you get much more biceps activity. And that's because of horizontal forces. So if you do a pull-up, even a wide grip pull-up, biceps activity is actually quite substantial, because what your body essentially does is if you flex the biceps, it's like bending the bar in powerlifting, that cue. That horizontal force, technically speaking, reduces the moment arm for shoulder adduction. More intuitively put, since the bar cannot bend, the force that you're putting into bending the bar essentially kind of helps pull you up.
Yep.
So the biceps and the lats, they work as a force pair to get you up. Now you can do that with like a pull-up bar or a barbell with a barbell row. But if you're doing like a dumbbell row, we see in research that dumbbell rows, they grow the biceps like half as much as biceps curls. And you can actually still count them, but half. So, and you probably also don't want to get all your volume for that, because again, no tension in the lengthened position and stuff. But if you're doing 10 sets of rows, that counts for something.
Sure.
So I would count that as 5 sets of biceps work on average. So that's a big one. You do count the compound work, but maybe not fully depending on the exercise, and especially not if it's like a dumbbell or a non-fixed implement. And then what you want is the total weekly set volume per week. That's what you want to optimize for. For triceps, it's a similar thing where people neglect specifically the long head. They do like push downs and then a bunch of horizontal or vertical presses, kind of like for the biceps. And again, you're neglecting the stretched position. So you want either overhead triceps extensions or skull crushers, skull overs, something where the elbow is more elevated, either completely overhead or at least somewhat over your body, not like a push down. If you only do the dips, push downs, exercise like that, then the long head cannot fully activate, because the long head also assists the lats in bringing the elbow back to the body. So if anything, you train the long head a bit with something like chin-ups, but it cannot fully activate there because it would sabotage the biceps. So a muscle can only contract or not contract, right? And the body will activate it and make it contract if it's net beneficial for the movement. And with something like a bench press, if the long head were to contract, it would pull the elbow back down. So it helps in extending the elbow, but it also pulls the elbow back down. So in research, we see that, at least the available research, bench presses grow the triceps about half as well as they grow the pecs. And the growth difference seems to come primarily from the long head. So the long head is really not well trained at all by horizontal pressing type exercises, even if you're using a barbell. Because the same thing applies as with the biceps. Fixed implement, you get horizontal forces, much higher activity in the arms. So again, you want to, dumbbell bench press, count that not even half, I would say.
Menno, if I'm doing lots of push downs and skull crushers, but I'm also doing lots of straight arm pullovers.
It's a great combination.
Is that a good long head hit? And do I then not so much need to worry about overhead extensions for triceps?
Yes. And I think something like lat prayers or pullovers in general, straight arm pullovers, are a really great exercise to balance out the triceps involvement, because many people, like triceps or elbow injuries, are very common in lifting. And if you just train the medial and the lateral head with all of the pressing, all of the push downs, you don't do anything for the long head, and you want to get that volume for the long head, you have to do a lot of other isolation work. And then your total volume for the medial and the lateral head, they is way too much. Kind of like the front delts, where many people have more of an overtraining problem than an undertraining problem.
Yeah.
And exercises that specifically hit the long head, but not the lateral and the medial head, that's basically just pullover type movements.
Yes.
So you really want those exercises to balance out the triceps involvement. And it's an intended target of the exercise. Many people will complain like, oh, I feel my triceps getting my pullovers.
Okay.
It's like, great. You can train the lats and the triceps, the long head.
Because they're an excellent lat exercise and an excellent tricep exercise and an excellent rear delt exercise as well. Because like, how could it not be? It's maximum stretch and tension at the same time. I love it. Anything from a programming perspective and a frequency perspective that you think people are missing from biceps and triceps training to kind of round out this discussion? Because excellent exercise critiques, but like one of my things, and maybe we can agree or disagree on this, I think that, muscles like the back, the chest, depending on the person, the legs, can take like a long time to recover if you're training them either bro split style or sort of normal style. But to me, it's like a lot of times biceps and triceps can recover quite quickly. And if you're like sitting around half the week and your biceps and triceps are neither going to be trained soon, nor are they tired, shouldn't you be training them maybe a little bit more often potentially than you train other larger muscle groups? What do you think?
Nah, that's stupid, bro.
Okay. No. And Menno Henselmans has been great.
No, I do actually disagree with that. Or at least let me put it this way. I don't think there's compelling evidence to show a difference.
Let's say if you, in your own experience, can train biceps and triceps more often, but aren't. Are you missing out?
I don't think so. I think they respond the same way as other muscle groups. Like total weekly volume is what matters. For volume, people probably, especially type bro individuals, men, they will err on the side of overtraining the arms versus other muscle groups, because then they have like a back day and then they have also arm day, but they neglect the fact that you hit arms on the back day as well.
Yep.
Maybe independent of volume, they can handle higher frequency, but I'm a big frequency proponent anyway.
Right. So you would say more frequency is probably good anyway, whether you're talking about one muscle or the other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Menno, this has been awesome.
Thank you.
Which is unusual because usually I fucking hate talking to you.
Yeah. Usually our conversations are like meh at best. Yeah.
Oh yeah, at best. Usually like outright infuriating.
Very mid.
Mid, whatever the kids are saying. Bet. Before we sign you off, I want to make a public service announcement against your will and but on your behalf. Every now and again, folks ask what is like a good personal training certification to get and a good personal training course to take. And I used to say a bunch of different ones, and there's tons of different really good ones. But my absolute rank one is the Menno Henselmans PT course. There are many, so I'm actually very good friends with Menno in real life. And so you think there's biasing me, and maybe it is. But I'm also able to see Menno's ideas in various regards. And some of them I just quite frankly disagree with you on, with all total due respect. Frequency and training, I think we disagree. Protein intake, I think we disagree. But your PT course is so goddamn in depth and so broad in addition to that, and so complete and so meticulous, and takes so damn long to get through, that you really will be receiving what I consider a halfway to master's level education in how to train people and how to control their diets if you get through the Menno Henselmans PT course. So if you guys are interested in really upgrading your skills and you really want a certification, and let's say you work for a gym that's like, well, no, we want you to have a cert, but we don't care which one. I just can't recommend the Menno Henselmans PT course enough.
Thank you.
Of course. Where can people go to find more about that course? Where can they go to find more of your insights? I love your Instagram page because that's kind of how I learn half the shit I know. I just scroll through. Like, you usually have really awesome slides where like the first thing is some bombastic claim, but then it's follow up, very good detailed nuance, and then a summary of literature at the end. What I like to do is just go through the first, and then I just get bored, and then I just stop scrolling. But for folks that want to learn a lot, following you on Instagram is an excellent place. Where else can people get a taste of the Menno, as I've learned to call it?
Mostly these days, I'm indeed on Instagram and YouTube at menno.henselmans for both. And on my website, mennohenselmans.com, you can see the course, the website. You can also get a free email course. If you're not familiar with my contents, you get like a tour of my most popular contents, and then see if you like that.
Excellent. I love it, dude. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Peace.